It's me again, here with a little bit more politics, religion, and coffee. I just wanted to say I've got a piping hot cup of coffee right here beside of me. I hope you do as well, and I hope you are buckled into your seats because I am going to blow your mind if you have never heard these quotes before. Now, for those of you that are highly partisan, you may want to turn away and look away for a few minutes because this is not going to suit with your world ideology, and it's not going to be able to resolve inside of your mind because I'm going to show you pretty definitive proof that the governments of the world are being controlled behind the scenes from people who are actually in the government. Now, you might say this is just trolling and these people didn't mean what they said. That would probably be true if it wasn't like, I don't know, 100 or 50,000 different people saying the exact same thing. It's not that much, that's hyperbole, but let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to center in on the bolded text because that's the most outrageous. I may read some of the non-bolded text, but I will put a link in the description. You need to like, comment, subscribe, and give me some ideas of what you'd like for me to cover. I will definitely do my research on it, but let's get into it. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money and control credit. And with the flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back. Take this great power away from the bankers, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear. And they ought to disappear, for this would be a better and happier world to live in. Sir Josiah Stamp, director and president of the Bank of England during the 1920s. Interesting. Here's one from Arthur Schlesinger Jr. This was in 1995. We're not going to achieve a new world order without paying for it in blood, as well as in words and money. Seems like a really nice guy. I do want to read this one from Henry Kissinger because I think it's very important. I'm not going to make too many comments on it, but this was back in 1991. Today, America will be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. That was referring to the 1991 LA riot. Tomorrow, they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told there were an outside threat from beyond. For example, an extraterrestrial invasion, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all the peoples of the world will plead to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by the world government. Interesting. This one by Congressman Larry P. McDonald from 1976 is interesting as well. The drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one-world government combining super-capitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I am convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent. Unfortunately, he was conveniently killed in the Korean Airlines 747 that was shot down by the Soviets. How convenient. This is Rockefeller his own self. David Rockefeller was addressing the Trilateral Commission in 1991. It would have been impossible for us to it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. If you want to read that entire quote, you should. I will just point out that he does mention a few popular newspapers: the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and I quote, other great publications who attend our meetings. Oh my goodness. Lord have mercy on our souls. This is Zbigniew Brzezinski. He is related to Zamika Brzezinski, or Mika Brzezinski as she goes by now. She is in the mainstream media with on the show Morning Joe. And this is what he said. I'm not for sure if he was her grandfather or father. I foresee a time when we shall have the means and therefore inevitably the temptation to manipulate the behavior and intellectual functioning of all people through environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain. That would explain a whole lot. Written in 1970. Imagine that. Here's another one by him in 1970. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance on every citizen. That's crazy. Doesn't sound very familiar to anybody, I'm sure. Here's U.S. Congressman Oscar Callaway again. Another U.S. Congressman in 1917. It says in March 1915, the J.P. Morgan interest, the steel, shipbuilding, and powder interest, and their subsidiary organizations got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States and sufficient number of them to control generally the policy of the daily press. They found it was only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers. And we could keep going with that. I'm not going to go any farther. There's only about 5 media companies that own the press as we speak today. It may be 4, maybe 5. One time it was 6. So it's a lot easier these days. Here's Ted Turner from TNT in 1996. A total world population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline from present levels would be ideal. Interesting. Here's George H.W. Bush, September the 11th of 1990 and September the 11th of 1991. The world can therefore seize the opportunity, Persian Gulf crisis, to fulfill the long-held promise of a new world order where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind. Interesting little quote there. I suppose he would be branded a terrorist by the FBI because he promotes the idea that there will be a new world order. In case you're not aware, a memo came out maybe last year, that said that people that believe in the new world order are dangerous and quite possibly domestic terrorists. So I suppose our former president, G.H.W. Bush, would have fit that profile. That's not the only time he said it, though. Here's President Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State. This was in Time magazine, July 20th of 1992. In the next century, nations as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. Wow, what a ray of sunshine. Pleasant, very pleasant. I don't want to say anything too negative, but I can't believe the Time magazine let him walk out of there without calling the FBI or something. Oh wait. Wouldn't have made a difference. Whoops. Here's the Prime Minister of Canada. Until the control of the issue of currency and credit is restored to a government and recognizes its most conspicuous and sacred responsibility, all talks of the sovereignty of Parliament and of democracy is idle and futile. Once a nation parts with the control of its credit, it matters not who makes the laws. Usury, once in control, will wreck the nation. Louis McFadden on the 1929 stock market crash. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. International bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair so that they might emerge the rulers of us all. Unfortunately for Mr. McFadden, he died of poisoning shortly thereafter. Nothing to see here. We shall have world government whether you like it or not, by conquest or consent. This was a statement by the Council on Foreign Relations member James Warburg to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on February 17th of 1950, and the first thing I would have done had I been on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was to disband the Council on Foreign Relations. That sounded a lot like a threat, and yet we still have the CFR now. Here's British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli in 1876. The governments of the present day have to deal not merely with other governments, with emperors, kings, and ministers, but also with secret societies which have everywhere their unscrupulous agents and can at the last moment upset all the government's plans. Okay, well, the guy mentioned secret societies. Okay, that was 1876. You know, hey, I'll give you that. But let's go on down, because if you don't trust this gentleman, the former British Prime Minister, let's talk about what Woodrow Wilson said, The New Freedom, in 1913. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Hold on just a second. That's very treasonous there, isn't it? That's a nice little statement. I wonder who he's talking about. Here's President Woodrow Wilson, who introduced the Federal Reserve Act, which allowed the privately owned Federal Reserve to begin in 1913. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled and one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. I hope that doesn't upset anybody too much if you've never heard this before, coming out of the mouth of the former president in 1913. Wow. Wonder why the mainstream media doesn't cover this kind of stuff 24/7. That's interesting. Here's what the New York City Mayor John F. Hyland said in 1922. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both political parties. Oh, sorry. Sorry if you're a diehard Republican. Sorry if you're a diehard Democrat. We have to keep our eyes open. That's my opinion. Here is Winston Churchill. He said it in 1922. Not one of his most famous quotes. From the days of Spartacus, Karl Marx, Trotsky, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this world conspiracy has been steadily growing. This conspiracy played a definite recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century. And now at last, this brand of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of the head and have become the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. Did he just claim that a band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America were the ones that started the Russian Revolution? I don't know. Maybe he was wrong. What did he know? He was just in politics. He was there. That's the argument I always make. People always tell me when I start talking about this, or a lot of people say, well, that doesn't mean anything. What did Winston Churchill know? And my question in response is, well, what does Time Magazine know? What does CNN know? Obviously, they know whatever they get told to know. And that's not a very good argument if you ask me. Would you rather trust somebody that gets paid to sit around and regurgitate a teleprompter all day long, or somebody who has actually been in the government and knows how it works? That is my question. All right, here we go. Let's go down to, let's see. Oh, here you go. This is FDR's son-in-law. He wrote a book called My Exploited Father-in-Law. I bet that's not on the reading of everybody in high school, and probably should be. Here's the quote. The UN is but a long-range international banking apparatus clearly set up for financial and economic profit by a small group of powerful one-world revolutionaries, hungry for profit and power. The Depression was the calculated shearing of the public by the world money powers, triggered by the planned sudden shortage of supply of call money in the New York money market. The one-world government leaders and their ever-close bankers have now acquired full control of the money and credit machinery in the U.S., via the creation of the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank. Once again, that was his son-in-law, but I would rather trust somebody who was there than I would the people who he is talking about. Oh, nothing to see here. Federal Reserve, it's no big deal. We need it. Forever and a day, people thought the Federal Reserve was a government-owned entity. Oh my gosh. Lord help us. Lord help us, please. Okay. Here's a letter written by FDR to Colonel House November 21st of 1933. The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. Here is the Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter in 1952. The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes. That's, what would he know? 50 men have run America, and that's a high figure. That was Joseph Kennedy, father of JFK, in the July 26th issue of the New York Times. That was 1936. Those guys wouldn't know anything about government and how it works, though, because they had nothing to do with it. Nothing to see here. Here is Senator William Jenner in 1954. Today, the path of total dictatorship in the United States can be laid by strictly legal means, unseen and unheard by the Congress, the President, or the people. Outwardly, we have a constitutional government. We have operating within our government and political system another body representing another form of government, a bureaucratic elite. Imagine that. You ever wonder why they can't get anything done in Washington, and no matter who you vote for the most part, it seems like they do the exact same things, but they call it liberalism on one side and they call it conservatism on the other, even though the policies look almost exactly the same? Do you ever wonder why it's almost like watching wrestling when they scream and holler at each other, and then 5 days later you see them on a beach somewhere drinking beers with each other and clapping each other on the back? You ever wonder why it is when you look up bills that have been passed that have absolutely decimated our economy in this country, they have both Republican and Democratic names on them? I know that it requires both for the most part, and we call that compromise. But based on what I'm reading here, it may be just a little bit more complicated than just compromise. The case for government by elites is irrefutable. Senator William Fulbright, former chairman of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, stated at a 1963 symposium entitled "The Elite and the Electorate." Yes, is government by the people possible? Interesting. Here's Barry Goldwater. What the Trilateral Commission intends to create a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation states involved. As managers and creators of the system, they will rule the future. Here's a former Congressman, John Rarick, in 1971. The Council on Foreign Relations is the establishment. Not only does it have influence and power in key decision-making positions at the highest levels of government to apply pressure from above, but it also announces and uses individuals and groups to bring pressure from below, to justify the high-level decisions for converting the U.S. from a sovereign constitutional republic into a servile member state of a one-world dictatorship. Do I need to keep going on? I shouldn't have to. I think that you guys can read the rest of it on your own. I just do want to point out that U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, "In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happened, you can bet it was planned that way." I also want to point out that obviously Richard Nixon needs to be put on the list of domestic terrorists because he believed in a new world order times two in 67 and 72. Once again, I'll throw this out. Adolf Hitler said this: "How fortunate for leaders that men do not think." Richard A. Falk said, "A new world order." Okay. So did Mikhail Gorbachev. He talked about a new world order. It's almost as if they were all in it together. Here is Brent Salcroft, quoted in the Washington Post. He talked about a new world order. Here is Richard Gephardt at the Wall Street Journal. He talked about a new world order. Here is President Bush again, HW, new world order. Here is an excerpt from A.M. Rosenthal in the New York Times. The New World Order was founded on a convergence of goals and interests between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. George McGovern, He said a new world order. William Safire said, forget the Hitler new order. He says it's Bush's baby, even if he shares its popularization with Gorbachev. Oh, man. Here's one from Senator Joseph R. Biden in the Wall Street Journal of 1992. How I Learned to Love the New World Order. Okay. How amazing. Henry Kissinger, How to Achieve the New World Order. Oh, this is great. New World Order, The Rise of the Region State. The title of an article, a political reform leader in Japan. Nelson Mandela referenced the New World Order, and so did President of Egypt in 1995. He referenced the New World Order. And this whole page is dedicated to those quotes. I didn't read all of them, but I will tell you this. There are other pages out there. You have to dig a little bit to find them. You can fact check these if you'd like, and if I'm wrong, I wish you would point that out to me in the comments. I do want to thank you for putting up with my rambling a little bit tonight, and I did have some trouble reading. It's a lot to take in. If you need, you could pause and think for a few minutes on some of the things that I brought out tonight just by reading quotes. Primary sources are not media sources, even though we have been led to believe they are. A primary source document is someone that was there through their own eyes. The media writing a story that quotes somebody that was there but doesn't give their whole story would be considered a secondary source at the very least. The media has set itself up to be unquestioned by the public, because why could we question the media? Didn't they have boots on the ground? Didn't we see it with our own two eyes? You tell me. What is real, what is fake? I don't know. But I can tell you this. Going down this rabbit hole, going down this large black hole, as I like to call it, can lead you to believe that nothing you see on television is real, that the news is not real, and that there's something more to life than what's going on. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But I will tell you this. It's obvious to me that there's been a plan. There's been a plan laid for a long, long time. And once you start realizing that there's a plan, you start looking into other things, and you find out that not everything is always as it seems, at least not in this reality. Anyway, I hope you enjoy your coffee. Lay back. Have a good day. I know that we talked about some pretty sad things, but I think that being aware of it is one step closer to solving the problem. So as we are aware, we will be able to understand the long game, because American people have been playing the short game for way too long. If we can just get our man in for 8 years, everything will change for the better. When in reality, based on what I'm reading and what I believe, that may or may not be the case, and usually it's not. Sit back, get a big drink of your popping hot cup of coffee, and see you next time. Thank you for listening. Bye.